Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to walk through creating our project and setting up GitHub. So I'm going to start by just opening Unity Hub, and we will want to verify what version we're using. So in our class we're going to be using 2019.4, which is the LTS version, which stands for long-term support. So in theory, it should be stable. And I'm going to go to projects and hit that little down arrow to make sure that I'm choosing the correct version when I make a new project here. And I want to make sure that we choose Universal Render Pipeline. And so these templates, these two are sort of new, and they feature the scriptable render pipeline, and that's useful because we're going to want to try and use shader graph later, which is just a neat feature to get cool visual effects without having to write any code. And the universal render pipeline is intended to run on less powerful platforms like web and mobile. So we're going to use this one for our demo, and I'm going to call this third person design scenarios, and I'll go ahead and create the project. All right, so here's our new project. And you can read a little bit more about the universal render pipeline here if you haven't. The first thing I want to do is get this set up with GitHub so that we can track our version history and be safe in case something goes wrong. I'm pretty conflicted on how to show you how to do this. There are two main approaches. One would be to manually set up your Git repository and initialize Git LFS through the command line. And the other way is easier but kind of hacky, but I think it's faster. So I'm going to show you the way that I think is easier, but I'm going to provide a link to show you maybe the better way. So anyway, I'm going to go to the asset store first off, and I'm going to search the asset store for GitHub, and you should find the GitHub for Unity plugin, which I was really hoping, oops, I closed my search, sorry. All right. So when I first discovered this, I was really hoping that it would be a great solution for my students because it was actually, it's made by GitHub, but they seem to have rapidly abandoned it. So I use it for one thing, and I'll show you. I use it to start my repositories because I find it pretty easy. So you just import this asset. If you've never downloaded it before, you'll have to download it first. Now, a portion of my students have historically had some errors where this just doesn't work. And so if it doesn't work, you'll have to try the link that I'll put in the video details so that you can do it the more official way. But it has always worked for me, so I'll still show you how to do it. So when this is done importing, you will notice in the window section there's a GitHub option. And I am only going to show you I'm only going to use this very temporarily, so you'll see. So anyway, you open the GitHub window here, and you hit initialize a Git repository for this project. And if it works, it'll do what you just saw. If it doesn't work, it'll get stuck on that initializing progress bar that was there briefly, and then you'll just have to try the other method. So mine worked, and I have a repository initialized now, and what I would need to do next is publish it and everything. But at this point, I'm pretty much done with the GitHub plugin. So I'm just going to delete it. The reason I did this to create my repository, I'll show you. If I open GitHub Desktop, which this is just what I like to use to as a GUI interface for my Git repositories. Anyway, and you navigate to, let's see, we need to add a local repository here. So I'm going to go to the File menu, and I'll choose Add Local Repository. And so I just need to figure out where I saved my project earlier. If you don't know, you could always go into your Assets directory, right-click, and hit Show in Explorer. It'll show you where your project lives. This is where I saved mine. Anyway, I'll go back to GitHub Desktop where I'm navigating to that location. So I called it Third Person Design Scenarios. Now, there will be a repository in here because I used that GitHub plugin to create it. And what it does that's really nice is you'll see it has automatically configured Git LFS for me. Now, Git LFS, typically Git is not so good for large files, which is problematic in the context of game development because things like audio and art files can be pretty big. It's not just text and code. But Git LFS provides a solution for the large file problem with Git. So it's important to initialize Git LFS if you're using especially a 3D project and using Git for version control. So normally you would have to run some commands on the command line and set up a Git attributes file. But if you look at the default commit that was created when I hit initialize repository, it set up a git ignore for Unity, which is just the default git ignore that is available when you create a Unity git ignore on GitHub. And it also gives us this git attributes file, which configures Git LFS by telling it which file formats should be added with LFS. So these are going to be the binary files and the larger file formats. So things like your images, your audio, your video, that kind of stuff. So by using the GitHub plugin, even though it's broken, it does this small step very, very well. So I do kind of like it for that. Once I have this, I abandon ship on the GitHub plugin. So I go into the plugins directory, which at this point only has GitHub in it. I just will try to delete this whole folder, which may or may not work. I may have to close Unity for it to let me do this. Yeah, you'll see it didn't let me delete it. So let's close Unity and delete that folder. So really we could just immediately reopen Unity, and I think it will allow us to delete it. All right, so I've reopened my project, and I'm just going to try and delete this folder now and see if it allows me to. And it did. So now the GitHub plugin is gone, and the whole plugins folder is gone too. I don't really like to have empty folders because Unity will make a meta file for it, but there won't be any content in there, and it just can cause issues. So anyway, I deleted the plugins folder because there's nothing else in there. Now, back in GitHub Desktop, you're going to notice we have a whole bunch of changes. So what you would want to do, I suppose, is review this to make sure your git ignore is working correctly. So the main thing that your git ignore should be doing for a Unity project is ignoring everything in the library. So if you take a look at what the git ignore is doing, it's ignoring library, temp, all these directories are being ignored. Plus, auto-generated files are ignored, and you can kind of read which ones that we set up by default to ignore. The reason you want to ignore generated files is because they just waste space on your repository, and they waste bandwidth as you send them up to the cloud and re-download them, because they're just going to get regenerated every time you open Unity. So you only need the source files essentially, and then the generated files just will be created every time you open Unity. If you add these to Git instead of ignore them, in addition to wasting space and time, you also are prone to get more conflicts, because especially if you're working with other developers, when their Unity opens up and generates the files, they could have slightly different IDs or other details as opposed to yours, and then that can create a conflict, and you're just making lots of commits back and forth, changing these small things from your version to their version, and it's really not doing anything but causing confusion. So it's very important to have the git ignore set up. Now, because we use the plugin, the GitHub for Unity plugin, I am confident that this is correct. So even though this has 270 files, which sounds like a lot, the important thing is I see it's just things in project settings and things in assets. That's what you want to confirm. If you see something in the library folder, you know something went wrong. And so I'm going to provide an initial commit here, just because that's good practice to always add a note in your commits. So we'll just say add Unity project, because we haven't done that yet, and that's what this is. This is adding our Unity project. And I will commit. And this might take a bit because there's 270 files, and this is, if you try to do this with the GitHub plugin, it almost always breaks for me. It just can't handle dealing with that many files at once, I've found. So that's why I just abandon it as soon as I can. All right, so now my commit is made, and I'm going to hit publish, and I believe this will give me some options about what I want to name the repository, whether it should be private, and things like that. So, in theory, you already have a GitHub account, and you have GitHub Desktop already set up. If not, you need to do those things before you can publish a repository to your GitHub account. I'm going to uncheck keep this code private. So for our class, if you're in my class, you're going to need to share your work with me and your classmates as we do things like code review or just get feedback. So it's not really worth hiding it. This is not going to be any proprietary secrets or anything like that. This is just work we're doing together. So it'll be useful to keep it public. Plus, you get unlimited public repositories on GitHub. You might just get unlimited private repositories these days anyway, especially if you're a student, but either way, we want it to be public. So leave that unchecked, and I'll just go ahead and publish this thing. Now during this step, it's actually uploading it to GitHub, so this one might take a little bit too. Okay, so mine is done. If I go up to the repository menu in GitHub Desktop and I choose View on GitHub, it will open a browser window, which came up on a different monitor for me. But you can see now I have this repository here. Soon I should probably add a README and maybe add a description for this. But for now it's okay. All right, I think that covers about everything I wanted to cover in this video. So I'm going to stop here, and I'll see you in the next video.